That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast, it's time to wake up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very happy Thursday morning, October 5th, to you and yours. You're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I'm the director of digital media at warchant.com, and it's a good one for you today, ladies and gentlemen. An extended conversation with our friend Michael Langston, of course, the senior recruiting analyst at warchant.com. And actually, here in a couple minutes, we're going to be joined by Mike McCall, the chief meteorologist of WCTV here in Tallahassee. And of course, well, you may know what that's all about, but we'll get into that in a second. But first of all, thanks so much for waking up with us here at 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio, or of course, streaming over your mobile device to the TuneIn Radio app or the WTSM app, or maybe on your browser at ESPNTallahassee.com. The podcast, you know where you can get it: iTunes, Podcast Republic, WarChantRadio.com, YouTube. The list goes on and on and on. We thank you so much for downloading all those. If you like the show, give us a good review. Subscribe to us. It helps us, and of course, it helps you when you subscribe to the show. Don't have to go looking for that thing all the time. Radio@warchant.com. There's your email address. @WakeUpWarChant is your Twitter handle to do so. And get in contact with us. Reach out. Sorry there hasn't been a Renegade Express this week. It's just been a really busy week. I know we've kept putting it off, but it's just one of those things where there's been so many moving pieces. And, of course, the storylines outside of Florida State-Miami are not often more interesting than Florida State-Miami, but there's been so much to get to. And, of course, the folks who help us get to that are our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, all right there in the heart of College Town. So you may or may not know, but Tropical Depression 16, which is expected to be sometime soon, maybe by the time you're listening to this, we had to pre-record today's show, Tropical Storm Nate is currently forming out there in the Atlantic Ocean, expected to move into the Gulf of Mexico sooner rather than later, and we don't know what that means for this football game. It's so funny. 3 weeks ago, Irma ends up hitting South Florida. There was a big chance it was going to hit Tallahassee. Tallahassee thankfully avoids most of it, but South Florida still gets a really bad part. Miami has to take a little bit of time to get back together. We can't play Florida State-Miami when we're supposed to 3 weeks ago, early on in September. Fast forward to now, we've got this thing. And in that cone of uncertainty, quote-unquote, yeah, well, Tallahassee is within it. And there's a good chance that this storm could find its way to the capital city at some point, and it's not often that you see these storms in Tallahassee. That's something you're going to hear us talk about with Mike McCall there in a second. But overall, Florida State is aware of the situation. They told War Chant, quote, "We are monitoring the tropical storm and will continue to do so throughout the week." They said that on Wednesday afternoon. Now, the University of Miami has told media outlets in South Florida that it's in contact with FSU and the ACC, and they're monitoring the storm. But, of course, we got to play this thing, folks. It's Florida State-Miami. We've run out of places to move it. We've run out of places to go. I don't think it's a neutral site. And again, I don't have any insight on this one currently at the moment. I know there are probably some people who do. We're going to keep you abreast of that situation, and we'll give you as many details as we can on tomorrow's show as well. But it's worth noting, remember last year a hurricane also threatened Florida State-Miami down in South Florida, and there was a time where a lot of people thought that game was going to get played at Raymond James Stadium. And again, I don't know what the contingency plan is, but it is worth noting that South Florida's out. It's worth noting that up in Atlanta United is not playing on that Saturday because of the international break in MLS. The Falcons are free on Sunday. They're not playing there either. They have a bye week. The Jaguars are in Pittsburgh this weekend, so there's nobody at Everbank Field. It's worth noting that if one of those game places wanted to play ball and make a contingency place, there are venues open around. The only problem is, are they going to be surrounded by rain as well? So WCTV's chief meteorologist, Mike McCall, I got a chance to catch up with him yesterday after the 6 o'clock news, so keep that in mind. That was probably around 7 or so last night. So things may have changed a little bit by then. Make sure you're keeping abreast and make sure you're keeping yourself up to date on that. And of course, keeping yourself up to date on the updates of what's going on with the game. We'll have those for you on warchant.com, of course. But overall, I had a chance to talk with Mike McCall about what this means, what this system's likely to do, and what it means for the game on Saturday. Here's our conversation. First of all, Mike, thanks as always for taking some time to answer some questions with us. But, you know, we just narrowly missed Irma, and now we have Tropical Depression 16, which looks like it could well, right now, as of 6:45 last night when we're taping this, Tallahassee's in the cone. Just how rare is it to see Tallahassee and the Big Bend area in general have so much activity in one hurricane season?
Historically, we're a fairly protected area. As many people that have lived here for a while know, before Hermine, the last hurricane we had that really had a big impact was more than 30 years ago, and that was Kate in 1985. So, yes, they are fairly rare, but we're also along the Gulf Coast. So we've had a lot of near misses with some weak tropical storms, and hopefully that's what this one will be. But I wouldn't read anything to it as far as a trend. Let's hope this is not the case every summer from now on. I'd be very happy if we went another 30 years without another one of these systems.
Absolutely, and you talk about it. We were really lucky to avoid Irma. I know I already said that, but we certainly didn't get the brunt that a lot of people thought, but Miami still did, and of course that's why that game ended up being moved.
Right, you are. And this one, it's a little bit of a different type of setup. October is more of a Gulf month when it comes to tropical activity. The water is still very warm, and so climatologically speaking, we see a lot more development from the Caribbean into the Gulf, and that's exactly where this one is likely headed. And as of right now, it's forecast to become a hurricane over the central Gulf. Beyond that, there's still a lot of uncertainty, both with path and intensity, but it's something that we certainly have to start preparing for right now.
Overall, Tropical Depression 16, it's still a couple days out. I know at this point it's imperfect in terms of tracking what it can do, what it might do. What do we know right now about what Tropical Depression 16 is doing?
Well, the hope, in my opinion, is that interaction with land down over Central America along the coast of Nicaragua and Honduras. As you know, hurricanes don't like land. They get all their juice, their fuel is the warm water. So if it can weaken some there, that would be delightful. However, the water is very warm over the northwestern Caribbean, and we've seen many tropical systems rapidly intensify in that area. That's a very real possibility. Beyond that, the uncertainty grows, and that's that cone of uncertainty that we unfortunately know so much about. At day 4, it could easily be 150 to 200 miles different than what's being forecast right now. So we really do have to stay tuned, as much as we hate to say that sometimes.
And I know the latest trend, when the latest projection came out at, I believe, 5 p.m., it looks like it's headed maybe a little bit more west, more towards the Delta region. Is that correct?
That's where a lot of the good old spaghetti models that people also, it's kind of a love-hate relationship with those. We'll wait and see. Remember that with these previous hurricanes this summer, we've seen some major adjustments of a few hundred miles. And right now, even the difference of 100 miles could be a huge difference into how much rainfall, how much wind, how much surge we could potentially get. Obviously, the farther west and the weaker, that's the best solution for us, but we'll have to wait and see.
Now, I will say this overall, and I'm not trying to fearmonger or drum up anything, but, I mean, you look at a lot of the forecasts a couple days out on Saturday, this whole state looks like it's going to be hit with some pretty heavy rain, at least in terms of if you had to think of a contingency plan to move this game, it really doesn't look like there's a simple solution right now in Florida.
Well, there's still enough uncertainty. One of the things, when I talk about the uncertainty with the intensity, a stronger system will actually draw a lot of the rainfall and the stronger winds in closer. With some of these systems, when they've already peaked and they start to kind of spread out, that's when you would maybe likely see more wind, maybe not hurricane force, but stronger winds and more rain across the peninsula. If this is out over the middle of the Gulf, the peninsula of Florida is probably going to be in fairly good shape. And depending on the speed, we may not really feel the effects here until Saturday night or Sunday. Some models even hold it off until early Monday. But it's this far out, with this only being Wednesday night as we talk, there's just too much of that uncertainty to pin down any of the effects yet.
So, with the idea that it might actually be slower, it seems Florida State Miami might have actually dodged a bullet in terms of not having an 8 p.m. kickoff.
Probably so. And the earlier the better. And I know that all the folks involved will have the safety of all the fans, not just during the game, but traveling to and traveling from the game. So that's all going to be looked at very, very closely during the next 24 hours.
Now, Mike, I know I will give you a chance to say the same thing that I know you said during Irma, and that's it's Wednesday night, Thursday morning when most people are listening to this. Now is not the time to panic.
No, and we learned with all these other systems that there is time to prepare, and I know a lot of folks probably still have a couple of cases of water sitting around.
There's still bottles of water in my apartment, if that's what you're asking.
Yes, and I know and we're not talking something where we have to run out to the grocery stores this morning. But as you're listening to this Thursday morning, yes, keep track of what's happening with it. You've got Thursday, you've got Friday, likely have Saturday too, to finish up any preparations and then play the waiting game again.
Mike, there has not been nearly enough football and marching Chiefs in our lives, and I think I speak for everybody when I say this game really needs to get played Saturday.
I got to, the marching Chiefs, as you know, I was many years ago, and you talk about a hard-working group of students. They feel the impact as much as anybody because they are so prepared, and then to have these games kind of pulled out from them. I'm rooting for the game to go on as scheduled, and for what will likely be Nate to be just a weak piece of junk tropical storm that falls apart to our west. We'll see.
Well, Mike, I know we'll keep an eye on it. I'm sure we'll probably talk soon and get an update on this. Thanks as always for joining us.
Happy to be here, and let's hope things work out for the Noles.
Nobody quite knows how to calm the nerves quite like a trained professional, and Mike's right. You should always keep yourself up to date. You should always be educated on these things, and you should always be prepared in case the worst is to happen. But it's also worth noting that we're still a couple days out. We've got to keep an eye on it, and this can be an imperfect science. We don't always know where these things are going to go, even the people who get paid to know it. So that's nature. You just got to keep your eye on the prize. And, of course, like I said earlier, we will completely keep you updated with all the updates on warchant.com about what's going on with the status of this football game. We got to get this thing in, folks. Florida State-Miami can't not be played, right? That's just not right. I mean, ULM, sure, whatever. You can't not play Florida State-Miami. We'll find a way. I know they will. And honestly, football's just got to be back at Doak Campbell Stadium. One game through, heck, here we are as we sit in week 6. Florida State's played one game at Doak Campbell Stadium. And if Florida State doesn't get to play at Doak Campbell Stadium this weekend, how do you go half a season while only playing one home game? It kind of blows the mind. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to get you caught up on all the things you may or may not have missed over the last 24 hours in the world of sports. Let's get you caught up. This is While You Were Sleeping.
Hello. Good morning. Wake up. Wake up. Wake me up. Good morning. Good morning.
What happened last night?
We start in Major League Baseball, where we now know what the divisional series are going to look like, thanks in part to an 11-8 victory that the Arizona Diamondbacks had over the Colorado Rockies last night in Phoenix. That, of course, means that the Diamondbacks will play the Dodgers in the NLDS. Speaking of the NLDS, that other series is going to be the Cubs and the Nationals squaring off. Two really good series, by the way. And you look up and down at all these series, and this is good baseball. If you like baseball, this is a playoff for you. Of course, we already knew what the AL is going to be, and that's the Red Sox and the Astros playing that series. And the Yankees, by virtue of their win over the Minnesota Twins, going to be playing the Cleveland Indians in their game as well. Of course, October, baseball, playoffs, but October also means hockey is back, ladies and gentlemen. And the NBA will be back soon enough, but for right now, we do have some NHL action for you. Games that matter, and we start with Toronto, who's all over the Winnipeg Jets last night. 7-2. Overtime is what it took, but the St. Louis Blues were able to defeat the reigning Stanley Cup champions in their building, 5-4 last night, that score. And Edmonton, the Oilers, a lot of folks picked to come out of the Western Conference there. 3-0 for Connor McDavid's crew over the Calgary Flames at home. When we come back, it's an extended conversation with our friend Michael Langston. Well, about recruiting. It's about the guest list for Florida State-Miami. It's about this coaching staff, what they have to do to pull in recruits. What does a win do for Florida State's recruiting momentum? What does a loss do for it? And, of course, also the other end for Miami. We're going to get into all those topics. It's an extended conversation right after this on Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Yes, Florida State just landed a 5-star commitment.
I don't see that anywhere online. How did you get that news so fast?
I'm on the new warchant.com app. I get news updates and scores pushed to my phone instantly.
How much does it cost?
It's free. Just go to iTunes or the Google Play Store, type in War Chant, and install it on your phone. That's it.
A free app that keeps me constantly up to date on Florida State sports and recruiting? Wow, that makes it incredibly easy to follow my Seminoles and never miss out.
With the app, you'll also get quick access to all the stories and features on War Chant, including the ever-popular message boards that feature thousands of fans talking about the Noles.
WarChant.com, your ultimate Seminole source.
Welcome back to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio. And, of course, the battle on the field for Florida State-Miami, that is, heck, if we end up playing a game, is just as important as the battle off the field. Of course, the big recruiting battles that we've been talking about all week on Wake Up War Chant. And, of course, Florida State's momentum. This is a big game to keep that going and to keep Miami at bay, especially with Mark Richt in his second year at the U. We bring in Michael Langston. You know him, our senior recruiting analyst. And, Michael, first of all, how are you, my friend?
I'm great, man. I'm great.
Well,
just ready for this big weekend, hopefully.
Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about big weekends, it doesn't get much bigger than this. First of all, just a complete heads up, biggest name in your opinion that's on this list that's visiting Florida State this weekend?
Well, I think, I mean, there's several, but I think Jalen Waddle, wide receiver from Texas, I think that's a really big one. Obviously, one of the best receivers in the country. I think having him there is important. I think he's up there. I think you also have to put up their offensive lineman, Trey Hill. That's really big. And certainly with their struggles on the offensive line, I mean, he would be a big jolt to their offense, having a guy like that to kind of almost finish off wrapping up their offensive line class. So I think those two just certainly jump out at me. And then, of course, later if we do add them, quarterback Justin Fields would be a big one, assuming he makes it over this weekend. You know, we hear he's likely to come, but there's nothing official. We haven't gotten enough confirmation that we feel good putting them on the list yet. But certainly those guys I think would be the guys to watch.
Yeah, of course. Plenty of big names for Florida State, Miami, as always. And before we get to a couple of these other guys, we talked about it a little bit over the last couple days. We talked about it a little bit with Gene. We talked about it a little bit with Ira. And I know you have a story that came out yesterday on warchant.com. Is Miami threatening FSU's reign as the state's best? And, Miami's mended a lot of those bridges in South Florida that Al Golden destroyed. He's put together a lot of very positive recruiting momentum. How important can this weekend be towards momentum for Florida State-Miami? Because let's face it, Gene and I talked about it yesterday. One blink of an eye in 2010 completely changed the momentum of Florida State, Miami, and Florida. Could Miami be looking to do something like that this weekend?
I think they could. I mean, especially when you look at, they're putting together a solid season already. Granted, they haven't played, any top team yet, but, per se, compared to FSU, who's played Alabama. But it certainly sets up that way. It's a good start. And as I mentioned in my piece, it could be a turning point to when you look back, if they do somehow win this weekend, you'll look back and say, hey, that was the moment, that we saw things turning. So I think it's very realistic, and I think it's also very vital for FSU. I mean, I don't usually say must wins, but this is one of those that feels like a must win, and certainly is one of the few times I can remember that there's a legit shot that FSU could lose that game. So I think that's what puts even more pressure. And you don't want to base the whole thing, and I'm not saying the season's over if they lose, but this is an incredible opportunity for FSU to, right now it's kind of in a standstill. So if you got that win, it would be a incredible surge of recruiting momentum for FSU.
And I was about to say, and let's flip that to the inverse side. What exactly does it do for Miami if Florida State does win this game?
Well, I think it solidifies kind of what they've been preaching to their recruits and players is, they plan on playing for championships and they plan on being the best team in the state. And let's face it, I mean, when you lost 7 in a row, if you lose 8 in a row, that's not exactly defending that statement. So I think it kind of backs up their statement if they win that game. Regardless of all the issues with Florida State, it still backs, with a freshman quarterback and, and certain injuries here and there. But still, it backs up what they've been saying, that it would show the South Florida recruits, not just in 2018, but your future in 2019 and 20, that, hey, we are getting back to that. Now, it's a start to that. It doesn't mean you win that game and everything's hunky-dory, because, Miami could go in there, win this game, and then lose the next week, and it's kind of all for naught. So I think it's a start. I think it's kind of a starting point for Miami if you do that. It's kind of a starting point to get things going what you plan. But as Miami's had a problem with is they put everything into this game in their season, and as soon as they lose, they just fall apart. So, I mean, I think it's important not to make that one game your season if they don't find a way to beat FSU.
I think the good news for Miami, though, Michael, is you look at their schedule after this. They play a pretty tough Georgia Tech team. Of course, that game was originally supposed to be Thursday, but because of FSU-Miami, it got moved to being a Saturday game. But after that, you've got a nice little breather in between that and Virginia Tech, and that Syracuse is not terrible, but they're not great. And then, of course, your one road game in that stretch is a trip to North Carolina, who is in the midst of an absolute free fall right now. So I will say this, if Miami can't manage the schedule after Florida State, if you lose to Georgia Tech, so be it. Georgia Tech's not a bad squad. But if you can't take care of business in front of Syracuse and Carolina, that to me hurts recruiting momentum far more than maybe losing a game to Florida State.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is it's a stepping, you take that next step up. You can't take a next step, I think, without beating FSU. So if they don't take that step, it's kind of like you're taking a step back regardless of what they do, the rest of the year. I mean, say they lose to FSU and then they win all their remaining games and they're their ACC team in the ACC championship and they just get destroyed by Clemson. It's like it's not going to have the same effect if you didn't beat FSU. So I think it's a step up, and it's a step they have to make. And you can't preach all this stuff, about being the best in the state unless you take care of business, unless you finally get the monkey off your back.
Michael, we've talked a lot about some of these guys. Now let's go ahead and get in depth on Florida State's visitor list. The key positions that Florida State needs depth at: wide receiver, offensive line, linebacker. Well, there's going to be plenty of them on campus for Florida State. And we'll just go down the line here. Wide receiver, Jalen Waddle, who's confirmed to you that he's going to be in Tallahassee. Marquez Ezra, who's an FSU commit. DeMarcus Adams, FSU commit. Warren Thompson, who may be making an official visit. We don't know as of yet. Kenyon Jackson, who's a 2019 guy. Antoine Green, who's a FSU commit. There's a lot of guys at wideout who are going to be making a visit to Tallahassee here on Saturday.
Yeah, I think two of those guys that just jump out to me and did when I, confirmed they were going was, Jalen Waddle, who we've discussed earlier, and then Warren Thompson. I think Warren Thompson, they're in good position to flip him. I think eventually it happens. I think, his kid that's dream school's FSU, went over there to Oregon. You had a good time. Felt comfortable there. Obviously, Oregon, all the facilities and all that stuff, but his family wants him at FSU, and obviously that's his favorite team growing up. And I think as long as FSU can show a constant flow on offense, which they haven't yet, if they can show that, I think that could solidify it and just kind of, might be something we watch this weekend to see if he, jumps on board. But we'll see on that. But I think it's he's certainly a guy. I think they're trending in a good direction. And then Jalen Waddle, I think that's an Alabama FSU battle. That's likely to Alabama right now because that's one of his recent visits, and certainly Alabama's high up there. And you look at Alabama, what they do, every year with their offense. Granted, they're not a great mostly passing team. They're mostly run more than pass, but when they do pass the ball, it's dynamic. Certainly guys like Amari Cooper, and now this year Calvin Ridley. He's going to make a lot of money, I'm sure, in the NFL. So I'm sure they're selling that point. So I think, I'd put them slightly ahead. But I think this is a big weekend for FSU where they can show, I think it's very important to get guys like Naquan Murray going because that's kind of the same position Jalen plays. And if you can get him going, get some offensive flow, obviously it's going to be a great atmosphere. You don't have to worry about that. But I think watching the offense and a flow on offense is going to be a big thing for all these recruits that we're going to talk about, whether it be receiver or offensive line or tight end or whatnot or quarterback. Kids want to see that because then they can see how they fit there, and I think that's an important thing for the offensive side of the ball.
And Michael, I think on top of all that, you mentioned it, this is a big weekend for Nooney Murray. This is also a big weekend for this coaching staff. I mean, this coaching staff as a whole is under fire because of the on-field product. And recruiting-wise, for the most part, they've been able to deliver. But at the same time, of course, the fingers have been pointed a long time, rightfully or wrongfully, and you can argue that. Bill Miller, Lawrence Dossie, Rick Trickett, maybe less Rick Trickett, especially after the classes that he's brought in. But, guys bringing in elite talent at wide receiver. And I feel like this is a big weekend. First of all, your freshman quarterback's got to find those guys for that game to get opening up. Your offensive line's got to protect him to where he can find those guys. And then, of course, just show off what you can do with your offense and seal the deal with a couple of these dudes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I've noticed just watching is in protection issues. I mean, you got to give your offense a chance. I mean, they haven't had a chance to do much of anything as far as throwing the ball because, there's been protection issues. So, you're not asking for it to be perfect, but that's certainly where you got to get into a flow where kids can see what you can do because they have dynamic playmakers. And as Jimbo alluded to much of the week, these guys got to get open. They got to help the quarterback out and get open. And so it's not everything offensive line. I know everyone wants to mention that, but it's not everything. And the receivers got to get open and they got to help their quarterback out. But, it's a combination of things. Obviously, the offensive line, in my opinion, what I've seen is the glaring issue. But, this is the opportunity. Like I said, again, opportunity for them to really make a statement on a big stage. And the good news for FSU in this sense is whether they've won or lost, when Jimbo Fisher faces somebody that's a top-ranked team or a team in the top 10, 25, they usually show up and have a good game. Regardless if they won or lost, they show up and you see a big improvement as far as what they have done during the season. So, but I think that's the thing they got to show is they got to showcase their playmakers.
Offensive line-wise, Michael, there are 5 guys making a visit. 4 of them are committed to FSU. Is it worth thinking that maybe those guys are making an all-out blitz to try to get Trey Hill on board?
I think they are. I mean, I think they're trying to get him on board. I think he's visited FSU tons of time. I think FSU Auburn battle right now. A lot of people thought Georgia, but I think they've kind of slipped some. I think FSU has an opportunity there, and this goes back to what we were talking about the offensive line play. I mean, you don't have to be perfect. It's just about show a cohesive unit and a cohesive flow to the offense. And I think that's what kids are going to look for in, what you do in pass protection. I thought the offensive line played fairly well when they played Alabama, and they showed some of that. And I think recruits were impressed by, how the offensive line played against Alabama, considering who they're playing. But now they have to show that same kind of performance. I mean, they have to show, give something to see so kids can say, hey, I see myself fitting there. They're just missing me. I'm the only guy they need, or I'm the guy they need to really take them to the next level. And that's what kids need to see from the offensive line.
It's a position we haven't even mentioned yet, but I find it surprising. I shouldn't, because Brad Lawing's very good at what he does, but look at the list for defensive end, and it's just a long, long line of guys who have been well-known by recruiting and recruitniks for a long time. Dennis Briggs, Bobby Brown, of course, who's making his official visit. I always butcher this name, Michael. I know we've talked about him before, and that's Coyote Oladell?
Coyote Owendale.
Hey, close enough. You know what? Chris Bogle. There's so many guys here, and of course, Stacy Kirby, who's already an FSU commit. He's also listed as a linebacker to some folks as well. Michael, how does Lawing do this? And for as much as people can, get on this coaching staff, and after some of the performances that have been put together and some of the recruiting things that have happened, you can't always blame them. But if there's one guy, a spotless lamb somewhere in that staff, God, it's got to be Lawing and Odell Haggins.
Yeah, I think for the most part, those guys are pretty solid. I don't think it's been as good as they anticipated so far this year. I think last week you saw a lot more pressure than you've seen, in the previous game against NC State. But the thing with Lawing is he knows how to teach guys he knows how to sack the quarterback. That's what he's good at. And I think you'll see a lot of that, as far as when they play Miami, they're going to get after it. And we saw that last year with DeMarcus Walker. But I think he just knows how to coach guys to get after the quarterback. That's really his biggest thing. And unfortunately, the teams they played the last 2 weeks, they're both teams that like to get rid of the ball quick, run quick stuff, quick passes, short stuff. And I think people are trying to adjust to that. Problem with that is that when FSU starts settling in and starts taking away that small stuff, you're going to see a lot more sacks when the quarterback has to hold the ball longer. So I think Brad's done he knows how to teach his guys the technique, and he's one of the best technically sound, defensive end coaches out there. He knows how to develop his guys, as he showed with DeMarcus Walker, and the main thing is his guys know how to get after the quarterback.
Moving on, linebacker Amari Gaynor, of course we know him, Tallahassee product, committed to Florida State. Rosondo Lewis, another commit to Florida State. Quay Walker is the guy in the 2018 class who's visiting Florida State, who's not yet committed. What's the Florida State feeling on him?
Yeah, I think they have a solid shot there. I think he's always seemed to like FSU a lot, even when he committed Alabama, and he's got a long-standing relationship with Charles Kelly, and they're working him hard, and I think they certainly have a good shot there. And certainly this weekend, assuming he shows up, it'll be a big plus just to have him there so he can watch the linebackers and how they're used, because he hasn't seen a game in person, I think, besides the Alabama game. So I think this will help him and, kind of see how he fits into, how, Brad likes to use his outside linebackers, or even Bill Miller as far as the linebacker play. And, I personally think the linebackers have done, a pretty good job this year, and, both for Brad and Bill. But I think it'll, you'll be able to see, showcase those linebackers, and certainly be a big visit for him to, see all that and see how he would fit into that.
Michael, finally, a couple more things before I let you run. First of all, any big guy that we haven't mentioned that you have your eye on this weekend?
Well, I think Houston Griffith's one. He's taking an official. I think it's mainly FSU or Notre Dame, right now with him. And I think with a good visit, he's a guy I'll have on probably commit watch. He's a guy to watch because FSU's been trending for him for the longest, and I think they have the best shot to possibly land him. It wouldn't surprise me if he pulled the trigger after this weekend. And then the other guys, Patrick Surtain, because this is his first visit seeing an FSU home game. So I think having him on campus and getting him to see the schemes and what FSU does with their corners. They like to play 7 corners at one, or defensive back at one time. I think that's an enticing thing to Patrick. So I think main thing for Patrick, what he wants to see is just how the defense runs, and and just his comfort level in doing, if he was a part of that, how he would fit into kind of their defensive back situation. Because remember, he's close with Tavares McFadden. They both played obviously at American Heritage, and Brian Burns for that matter. So I think a good game from Tavares which they kind of compare him to, is a big thing for certainly Patrick to see. And there's other guys on there like Bobby Brown, who we mentioned, defensive end, taking an official visit. I think those are mostly the guys. And then defensive tackle, I think Jordan Davis, assuming he makes it, that would be a big visit just so he can see those defensive tackles like Derek Nunati and DeMarcus Christmas and assuming Marvin Wilson plays some. I mean, just seeing the rotation and what they do with their tackles, I think that's a big thing. But overall, it's a big opportunity weekend. That's the best way I can put it into words. Is this a great opportunity for FSU? And this is a situation where I don't think they can afford to lay a dud. They got to go out there and and get it done.
Finally, before I let you go, Michael, a little question about somebody who's already on the field for the Miami Hurricanes. Of course, Malik Rozier is the guy who ends up named as the starter for the Canes. And for those who maybe haven't seen a lot of him this season, what do you remember from him in high school, and how have you seen him improve his game since he's been at Miami?
Well, he's mainly a game manager when you watch him play. He knows how to, knows the offense. I think that's why he won the job. He doesn't have an incredible arm. He doesn't blow you away how he reads defenses, but, he runs the offense efficiently. He hasn't seen the pass rush that he's probably going to see this weekend, so that's going to be a challenge for Malik. And he is, you can force him in the turnovers or pressure, and I think, that's kind of what FSU do. But I think he's a guy that knows how to manage the offense, just doesn't, has good ball placement, stuff like that. But, the key is getting in his face and making him make throws that he doesn't want to do, and getting him in passing situations where FSU can really bring the heat. So I think he's a guy that knows how to run the offense. He's really good on check downs and stuff like that. So got to force him to do stuff he's not comfortable with.
You mentioned it. He's obviously the more experienced guy compared to N'Kosi Perry. But overall, why do you think that he ended up getting the starting job? Is it just that consistency?
I think it's just his efficiency running the offense and them moving the ball when he's in there. I mean, I think with N'Kosi Perry, you probably had a guy that's probably more dynamic, can do more things with his legs, and certainly has the arm talent to do some things. But I think with Malik, you have a guy that you consistently can trust, not going to make too many crucial mistakes, but at the same time, he's going to move the ball up and down the field for you. You're going to have the most efficiency on offense, probably with him running it. Obviously, he's never played in a game type this matter, but, and as I said, pressure on him, he tends to, force some passes when you do that. But efficiency-wise, I think he was the most efficient option they had.
Yeah, and make no mistake, this is eventually going to be N'Kosi Perry's team. But I think if you're Mark Richt, you're just kind of in win-now mode to a certain extent. You have a good running back, you have a solid game, and you have a good defense. Just do the guy that does the least to lose you the football game and let the rest take care of itself.
Yeah, because you have Mark Walton back there who, probably by the end of his career is going to be the all-time leading rusher there. He's the focal point of their offense. If they can run the ball, that takes a lot of pressure off Malik. But if they can't run the ball, then obviously that's a bad thing, because then you have to put the game in the hands of Malik. And I think that's the main thing they've done so far, is they've done a good job of not making Malik have to do everything. Kind of play his role into the offense and kind of mix it up and have a lot of balance. And I think they've done that. And obviously, Walton's run the ball really well. I think averaging over 120 yards a game. So I think as long as that continues, the balance will be there. But the main thing is they want balance on their offense. And when you get off balance, that's the problem when they run into trouble with Malik Rozier.
Finally, man, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm probably not going to get a chance to talk to you tomorrow. What do you think happens Saturday?
Well, hopefully there's a game.
That's fair enough. Fair enough.
Hopefully there's a game, but yeah, it's kind of going back and forth. I think it's going to be a close. I think it's going to be a close game. Everyone, I know some people are like, "Nah, they're going to get FSU and killed. They're just playing like crap." But I think a lot of people don't, disregard like how big an emotional win can be like that to get you kind of going and clicking on offense, like FSU did the Wake game. It was an ugly game, but the thing is, you saw some glimpses of what they can be. So I've always had a close game. I was mainly with Miami, but I'm gonna go gut feeling. I think FSU is going to pull it out 2017. I think it's going to be a close one, but it could go either way. But that's just my vibe on it.
All right, folks, you heard it right there. So if it doesn't work out well, at Michael Warchance, the Twitter account, where you can go and you can say, "But you promised, Michael Langston. You promised."
You can just blame Gene if that happens. Just say it's Gene's fault for forcing me to make a prediction.
Listen, all I'm saying is you said that, not me.
Okay. No, but like I said, I think it's going to be a good game, and I think it's always an emotional game. The thing in the Miami game, everyone always has a gauge of they feel what it's going to be, and most of the time it doesn't go the way you anticipate. It's like last year, most probably thought that FSU was going to be fine in that game. You're playing a young Miami team that, most people thought FSU would probably win by 10, maybe 14 points, and you ended up coming down to a block extra point. So I mean, I think these games are really hard to predict, and I think it's just a lot of times you just have to go on gut feeling of what you see so far.
Michael, thanks as always, my friend. Hope to see you out there on Saturday.
You got it, man.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, more on the other end. It's Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio. Put a ball on a time here on Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio. I've said it about 1,000 times this episode, and I'm going to say it again. We really need to play this game Saturday. We need Florida State-Miami in our lives. And I don't just say that as someone who, is involved in Florida State-Miami. I say that as a college football fan because take a look at this week's slate of games, and it's not super. It has a couple games that maybe people thought at the beginning of the year were going to be all right, but I mean, Alabama, Texas A&M, no thank you. Oregon State, USC, no thank you. Maryland, Ohio State, no thank you. LSU, Florida, yeah, no thank you. Notre Dame, North Carolina, no thank you. You can go down this line. Honestly, in the top 25, you have two really compelling games. And, oh yeah, by the way, one of them's not even on Saturday. It's tonight. It's Louisville and North Carolina State, of course. Louisville favored 3.5 on the road in Carter Finley. That's a hard one to call. That's a really hard one to call. But the big one on Saturday is going to be going on the same time as our game, unless, of course, kickoff gets changed, and that's West Virginia and TCU in Fort Worth. That's where game day is going to be. This is an interesting one because I can't really trust Kenny Hill, but at the same time, West Virginia always seems to be like they're on the edge of getting over that hump and making some noise in the Big 12, and they just can't get it done. Of course, it's worth noting, Virginia Tech beat West Virginia at the beginning of the year, so there's no real room for error there for the Mountaineers. And you go down the line, Michigan State, Michigan. Yeah, no. Washington State, Oregon. I'm really interested in that one. I want to see how Wazoo bounces back against a really well-coached team in Outson. I mean, Outson Stadium is as tough as it gets to play on the West Coast. Mike Leach teams like to stub their toe. So I don't know how to think of that, and I know that's probably a game we're picking Lucky 7 tomorrow, so I'm just kind of trying to talk this one out to myself right here. I know we're going to pick LSU and Florida, but, gosh, if you like good football, just don't. Don't do it. Don't do it to yourself. That's going to be yikes. I do want to see, though, how does Clemson respond after a big win? How do they go and they play the Wake Forest Demon Deacons? It's at home now. And Clemson seems to have steamrolled everybody they've played, but the Deacs are well coached, and the Deacs are kind of going off a letdown too. So that one's a fascinating one, but other than that, there's not a whole lot of interesting on Saturday, which is why, once again, we need to play Florida State-Miami. My thanks to Mike McCall for joining us today, and of course my thanks to our own Michael Langston for chit-chatting with us for a good little bit. Mike is up next here on 97.9 ESPN Radio. Talk to you tomorrow.
WarChant.com is the ultimate inside source for FSU football and recruiting. And now you can get in on the action for free for an entire month. WarChant.com is offering a risk-free 30-day trial subscription. Get full access to the #1 website covering the Seminoles just by entering the promo code WarChant30. That's WarChant30. Sign up and get in on the world's most active FSU message boards. Receive breaking news, stories from our award-winning staff, plus get exclusive interviews and videos. Just enter the promo code WarChant30. WarChant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.